So, why do so many project timelines just completely go off the rails? It's almost always for the same reason. People treat them like a picture hung on the wall, a static document that's basically useless the second it's printed. But look, a professional project schedule, it isn't a picture. It's a dynamic, living model. And today, we're going to break down exactly how you, as a strategic leader, can build and master that model using the develop schedule process. All right, let's pop the hood on this scheduling engine. Here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on the process itself, this core engine. Then we're going to look at the raw materials, the inputs you absolutely have to feed that engine. After that, we'll open up the analytical toolkit and do a deep dive into the techniques that turn all that data into a real strategy. From there, we'll check out the final blueprints, the outputs, before, tying it all together to see how this whole model actually works in the real world. So let's kick things off with the core concept. I want you to think of the develop schedule process not just as another task on a checklist, but as a factory. Seriously, it's an engine that takes this chaotic mess of raw data, all your activities, resource needs, and constraints, and through a really rigorous analytical process, it transforms it all into an actionable, logical, and most importantly, defensible plan. This is where we stop just having data and start making decisions. Now, I know this looks like a standard textbook definition, but trust me, there is one word in here that changes everything, and that word is model. We are not just making a list of dates, we are creating a predictive tool. See, a model represents the interconnected logic of your project, and that lets you simulate changes and forecast what's going to happen. That right there makes it a strategic asset, not just some administrative report. Okay, so just like any factory, our scheduling engine is totally useless without high-quality raw materials. You know the old saying, garbage in, garbage out? Well, in scheduling, that is the absolute unbreakable law. The sophistication of your final schedule model is directly tied to the quality of the data you feed it. I mean, if your duration estimates are just wild guesses, your model is pure fantasy. If your activity list is incomplete, your timeline's going to have a huge hole you won't even see until you fall right into it. I want you to think of these inputs as creating this full 360-degree view of the project. It's not a random checklist, it's a completely coherent system. The project management plan, that sets the rules of the game. The project documents, they define the work itself. Resource info tells us who is available and when, and the risk register, well, that prepares us for what could go wrong. A truly world-class schedule model has to integrate every single one of these. If you leave out the risk register, for example, you're just building a best-case scenario schedule that's pretty much guaranteed to break. All right, now this is where the real fun begins. Once we have our raw materials, we get to open up the analytical toolkit. And this is the moment a project manager stops being an administrator and becomes a strategist. We're going to use these techniques to analyze, optimize, and really stress test the schedule, turning it from a simple draft into a robust, realistic plan. So, the undisputed backbone of all schedule analysis is the critical path method, period. Every other technique we're about to talk about, from resource optimization all the way to schedule compression, it all builds on the fundamental understanding that CPM gives you. It is the starting point for any serious schedule analysis. The real power of CPM comes from its simple four-step logic. First, the forward pass figures out the absolute earliest you can do everything. Then, the backward pass works from your deadline to find the absolute latest you can do everything. And the difference between those two? That's your float, your scheduling wiggle room. And that fourth step? That's everything. The chain of activities with zero float is your critical path. Any delay, even one single hour, on any task on this path will delay your entire project. It tells you exactly where you need to focus all of your attention. Okay, so you've calculated your critical path, and you know the theoretical shortest duration for your project. But here comes the reality check. The critical path method kind of assumes you have infinite resources. And now we have to square that perfect theory with the real world, with the actual constraints of your people and your equipment. And that is where resource optimization comes in. So this brings us to a huge strategic decision. You've got two main tools here, leveling and smoothing. Resource leveling will solve your resource conflicts, but it can come with a massive cost. It can actually change and extend your critical path, delaying your whole project. Resource smoothing, on the other hand, is the safer play. It only uses the float you already have, so by definition, it will not delay your project's finish date. But the trade-off? It might not solve all your resource conflicts. So you have to ask, what's the one thing we absolutely cannot compromise? The deadline or the availability of our key people? Let's think about another scenario. You've done the critical path analysis, you've optimized your resources, and the schedule is still way too long for your stakeholders. They demand an earlier finish date, but you're not allowed to cut scope. It feels impossible, right? But you've got one final lever you can pull: schedule compression. And here we go, another classic consultant's trade-off. Your two options are crashing and fast-tracking. Crashing is basically solving the problem with money, adding more people, paying for overtime. It's really effective for those critical path tasks, but it directly jacks up your cost. Fast-tracking is all about taking on more risk, doing things at the same time that you'd normally do one after the other. This can save you time without adding direct cost, but it dramatically increases the chance of rework. So the question you have to help your client answer is, which can their project absorb better? An increase in cost or an increase in risk? So after feeding our engine with all those inputs and running them through the entire analytical toolkit, what does our factory actually produce? What's the final, tangible blueprint that we can actually use to manage the project? This is honestly one of the most vital distinctions in all of project management. The project schedule, that's your dynamic, day-to-day working document. It reflects reality, it's constantly being updated. The schedule baseline, however, is the formally approved, frozen version of the plan. This is your yardstick for performance. You compare your actual progress against this baseline to figure out if you're ahead, behind, or right on track. So beyond the schedule and its baseline, the process generates other really critical data for managing the project. You get detailed schedule data, like resource histograms, which are so important for seeing bottlenecks before they happen. You get project calendars that get everyone on the same page about available working time. And, critically, when your analysis shows the original plan just isn't going to work, you generate formal change requests. Now, this isn't about admitting failure. It's about proactively correcting your course with a documented, approved new plan. Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've gone from raw inputs through a super powerful analytical toolkit to a set of refined, actionable outputs. So what's the single most important principle to take away from this whole process? What's the mindset shift that separates the great schedulers from the, average ones? And that brings us right back to our central idea. The most important takeaway is this: stop treating your schedule as a static artifact. It is a dynamic model. It has to be a living tool that you are continuously feeding with actual performance data, reanalyzing, and then using to forecast the future. A schedule's primary value isn't telling you what was planned. It's in helping you predict and shape what's going to happen next. So I'll leave you with this one final thought to reflect on in your own work. Is your project timeline just a static list of dates, a historical document from back in the planning phase? Or are you actively managing a dynamic model, one that's actually tough enough to handle the inevitable pressures and surprises of reality? Because the answer to that question, well, that often defines the line between project success and failure.